President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday declared that his government's promise of change for homeowners in the country had been fulfilled. Buhari spoke during the presentation of keys to some new homeowners at the Federal Housing Authority FAH Juba in the Federal Capital Territory. Also in a bid to transform Nigerian military into a force to be reckoned with globally, President Muhammadu Buhari has emphasized the importance of training, networking, and equipping the country's troops. State House correspondent Adesua Morwa reports.
The nationwide Secure Defense Headquarters Communications Network, known as the GIWA 2 project, is expected to provide real-time secure means of communication and incident reporting, as well as information exchange between the armed forces and other security agencies.
Furthermore, the GIWA 2 project initiative aligns with some of the main focus areas of the federal government, namely security, economic progression, and technology development.
The president lauded the service chiefs and directed the Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy to lend its support to the defense headquarters.
I urge the Chief of Defense Staff, service chiefs, and all personnel of the armed forces to continue to work assiduously towards enhancing our national security.
Every commander would wish to have both technical and operational control of his own communications, as well as the capacity to influence those of his adversaries. And although ambitious, this wish is justified world over, despite the high financial cost and technical manpower implications.
For the administration, the commissioning of the project's first phase marks a significant milestone towards the goal of boosting the national security and combating insecurity in the country. Elsewhere in Juba, a suburb of the nation's capital, the president presents keys to new homeowners at the Federal Housing Authority. Buhari told the homeowners the 784 units is an indication of his administration's commitment to lifting people out of poverty.
The new homeowners who benefit from this estate have taken a step up on the ladder of prosperity and away from poverty.
The estate, which sits on over 18 hectares of land, cost a total of 9.5 billion naira, with a subvention of 7.5 billion naira from the federal government.
These are beneficiaries of the rent-to-own scheme that you directed us to implement. So there are people who can afford to pay all the monies for their flats. They have paid. There are people who have taken mortgages. They have also moved in. But there are people who can afford to do neither. And so we adopted a rent-to-own scheme by which the accumulation of their rent over years will transform them into owners.
At the presidential villa, President Buhari approves the partial exclusion of the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, MOFI, from the Treasury single account during the first Governing Council meeting of the body.
As a government-owned investment company, we must support Ministry of Finance Incorporated in exercise of its responsibility of ensuring that we achieve strong returns on our investments, while also contributing to the broader economic development of our country, and that the investment Federal Government of Nigeria has made through Ministry of Finance Incorporated makes a positive contribution to our economy.
MOFI, which was launched on February 1, 2023, aims to transform from a registry of investment records to a world-class asset and investment management company. Adesua Omorwan, Arise News.
Right, a lot to talk about. Ayo?
Yes, Rufai. The president is very busy. T minus how many days? 29 minus 3 days to inauguration. That's 26 more days before he steps down as the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And in the last few days of his administration, he's launching projects that he hitherto had committed his administration to. I'd like to focus on, he talked about, in that report by Adesua Moran, we'd seen the GIWA 2 project with the military, we'd seen the housing project with the Federal Housing Authority, and finally we saw the MOFI decision with regards to the Federal Ministry of Finance. However, I'll center on the housing program, and that is congratulations to the new homeowners in Zuba in the Federal Capital Territory of Abuja, where the president yesterday inaugurated 748 houses. It's interesting to note because housing is a big issue when we talk about lifting people out of poverty. Whereas in Nigeria, we are faced with, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, 113 million Nigerians who have been who are in multi-dimensional poverty. And part of multi-dimensional poverty is lack of access to decent and affordable housing. Now, as at 2022, Nigeria had a housing deficit of about 28 million. And this is side by side a growth rate, an average growth rate of 2.4%, in between 2.4 and 2.5%. Therefore, for any administration to close the gap of the housing deficit that we have in Nigeria, and I talk about decent and affordable housing across the nation, you need to build 28 million houses, which is estimated to would cost about 12 trillion. Out of these 28 million houses, the president, this administration, under the Buhari government, has built 6,000 units, according to the former Minister of Works and Housing, Alhaji Muazu Sambo, last year. Now, out of these 6,000 units across the country, yesterday, 748 of them were inaugurated and keys handed to some homeowners. As you notice there, the homeowners, according to the current Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, will rent to own. So this is providing some Nigerians that relief in terms of being able to own a home that's decent and that's affordable. So congratulations to the president in this particular area. However, we must still mention that we have 748 homes or 6,000 units is a drop in the ocean in terms of the amount of houses that still need to be built to meet the deficit in terms of housing in Nigeria, especially that's decent and that people who earn low wage or medium income earners can afford. And so you begin to look at some of the challenges that must be faced and see if truly, as the president has said in his speech, he's been able to deliver some of his promises that he mentioned. Subsequent governments have tried, that's to be honest. So it's not just President Muhammadu Buhari's tenure. We had Housing for Home for All year 2000, we've had Home for All year 2010, Home for All year 2015, Home for All year 2020, we're in 2023 and we haven't scratched the surface yet. So you begin to wonder, what is the big challenge in terms of us being able to build houses that the ordinary Nigerian can aspire to own. Compared to other countries where there's easier access to mortgage, you don't have to bring your family members and all, collateral that's almost impossible to meet to access a federal mortgage bank. We would meet that if we can reduce the bottleneck in that area. So yes, the president inaugurates, he's excited, he's happy because he's very big on social inclusion, but the work has only just started. And out of 6,000 units, only 748 have been inaugurated thus far. It's best to question what's next in terms of the next few days if he's able to still do a few more work in terms of housing deficit in Nigeria.
Dr. Bati?
Housing deficit is a major problem in Nigeria. And the issue is beyond the government providing 748 new homes under the auspices of the Federal Housing Authority. However, what has been done is commendable. When you look at the picture, it looks really nice. You buy to own, and you pay mortgage and all of that. So congratulations at different levels to the Federal Housing Authority, to Minister Babatunde Fashola, who has been in charge of the Ministry of Works and Housing and has been able to show results, concrete results in this regard. I'm sure it will go into his own scorebook as one of the glaring evidence of what he was able to do as Minister of Works and Housing. And also an illustration of President Muhammadu Buhari's attempt to push the needle in addressing the multidimensional poverty segment of housing in Nigeria in that regard. However, the bigger question to raise is that the housing crisis in Nigeria goes beyond governments setting up estates, creating 748 units on hectares of land and all that. The bigger challenge in the housing industry in Nigeria would seem to be providing the enabling environment for development in that industry. Active persons in that industry, developers, particularly, to use a common phrase, complain about the rising cost of cement, the rising cost of everything. And government itself always says it's not something that government can do alone. You need to have an enabling environment that will promote public-private sector partnership. While those new homes were being inaugurated and new landlords and new landladies were being admitted, yesterday, Minister Fashola said, over 13,000 jobs had been created because, jobs were created for artisans. But the bigger vision will be, how do we create an enabling environment for the developers industry, those in the housing sector, beyond government, who can do a lot more federally in the subnationals, and more Nigerians can have access to homes. So that is a big issue there. However, beyond all of that, the second leg of the report by Adesua Omorwan has to do with the MOFI, the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. And the federal government saying the Ministry of Finance Incorporated has now been granted the leave to opt out of the Treasury Single Account, the TSA. Okay, the best way to illustrate this is to recall that the NNPC used to be the biggest contributor to the Treasury Single Account. What has now been made clear, just to use that one example, is that by saying, the MOFI has been granted an exclusion, is that, look, the NNPC PLC, NNPC Limited, now, as we have been told, under the reform regime announced by the NNPC Limited itself, is that NNPC Limited now will not be required to put money into the Treasury Single Account because the MOFI, as conceived now, is an investment profit-generating company. And that, I think, is something that the next administration will have to take a very close look at, because it is very clear that the free money that people were expecting will not come in. And what are the implications for federal government revenue? That's the subtext. Governor Godwin Obaseki on May 1 was telling labor leaders in Edo State that, look, going forward, we are going to have issues because the federal government will not just have access to free money, and only two options. Either you remove fuel subsidy, or you increase taxation, or you do ways and means. You print money. So I think all of this should be tied together. So if the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, in charge of investments, has now been excluded from the Treasury Single Account, what is left for the Nigerian government in terms of revenue? I think that is a very serious matter that needs to be interrogated. Maybe when Rochus Odiri comes on this show this morning, maybe we'll ask him and say, Rochus Odiri, what do you think? MOFI exclusion from the Treasury Single Account, is that not a bigger issue for us to consider? And the Nigerian government coming up with a new tax regime with regard to importation of beer and other luxury items, what will be the meaning? Is government, the Buhari government, trying to jump ahead to try to see how they can, provide a new template, even when the new administration comes in? At that event yesterday, the other major thing that came out of the federal government of Nigeria was President Buhari talking about upgrading the Nigerian military to be a force in the global economy. Okay, when I read that part of the story, I laughed. And I said, is it at this last moment that President Buhari, a man who was elected as a former head of state, a military general, a statesman who understands, presumably, the key issues affecting Nigeria. Is it at this last minute that he's now talking about upgrading the Nigerian military, his own constituency? And he was speaking, we were told, at the inauguration of a nationwide secure defense headquarters communications network. So what you can give to the Buhari administration is that in the last minute, that administration is trying to say, we're not lame duck. We're still in charge. And will continue to function to the last moment. That's good. Excellent in terms of strategy. But where does that leave us as Nigerians? And while I like that, I think the people in the village should be reminded that President-elect Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to Port Harcourt, where they have declared a public holiday to receive him. So how do we balance these things? As we all coast home to May 29. But it's okay. It's okay. We can say it. But there are questions to be raised.
So a lot needs to be said. Number one, concerning Murphy, a couple of ideas and suggestions around. I think to a large extent, the new coming administration of Bola Tinubu will have to review that. Just like I also think that at some point, maybe about 4 or 5 months down the line, the new administration of Bola Tinubu will have to have its own supplementary budget. It's a couple of my thoughts. And why do I say we have to review Murphy? It's because the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, definitely, if you're saying it's an investment arm, statutory body on its own, it's definitely going to take revenue, big time, big league, off the revenue we do not have in Nigeria. And I'll tell you why. And if you say the Ministry of Finance Incorporated is an investment arm, what happens to NSIA, Nigerian Sovereign NSIA Investment Authority? Is that not an investment arm too that takes the excess crude account money and a couple of other monies have and invested in some other things? What should be done is to allow the money come to the TSA so we can have transparency in the first place. When the TSA was set up, it was for transparency. If you're having different accounts for Murphy, different accounts for TIA, then it becomes nebulous because we can't have transparency across all the accounts and it becomes problematic. We all know how much problems the fact that NNPC has not remitted any amount into the federal purse in the name of paying subsidies in the last couple of years. We all know how much it has created a dent. The state governors are suffering. Look at what gets to them in FAC. Hence, Governor Obaseki was saying that it will be difficult to pay salaries just yesterday because they are bleeding. If not for the FIRS, we will not be able to stabilize. And that's why I say kudos to the FIRS, because it is only the FIRS that is saving us now with the taxes that are coming in. Other government parastatals that are supposed to bring in money, it's not bringing as much. We've not been able to harness gas. So the other cash cow now, let's say, okay, Ministry of Finance Incorporated, that we are taking away from TSA. Honestly, I think a new government is coming in, so they will have a rethink about that, just like I think they should also get a supplementary budget. The second bone of contention will be as regards the military. In all fairness to President Muhammadu Buhari, he has pumped a lot of money into the military. I think in his first 5 years, he's done about over 5 trillion. But in that first 5 years too, we have over 11,000 civilian deaths due to insecurity. So the question is not about pumping money into the military. The question is about the accountability threshold of the spending of the money being pumped into the military. Hitherto, we remember in this country how top military officers had to be arrested for corruption, and now we had to see their homes on newspaper pages. In fact, I was shocked to learn that a house that was just built beside where I used to live before was owned by one of these top military officers. I saw the house in the newspaper. We all remember that time in this country. But the question is, how was the money spent? And how can we get better results? So we can be able to tune up things. The military always makes the argument that compare ourselves to other militaries of the world, the money we're even pumping in cannot even go much. But the little we have we been able to use it effectively? Kudos to this administration. We bought a couple of jets. We all remember the tale about the Super Tucanos. But how well have we deployed them to the battlefield? Were they the best military decisions? So we purchased a lot. We spent a lot. The Nigerian military have been better for it. We also bought a couple of JFs made out of Pakistan to rejig the normal Chendus we used to have before. It's a slurry name they call it. I don't want to call that name on television. But how well have we been able to harness this spend to be able to get results? Some will argue, oh, we have done. Some will argue otherwise. But the taste of the pudding, like they say, is in the eating. Are more people dying as a result of insecurity? Have we been able to stem the tide? There are problems on ground as regards insecurity. As regards housing, we know the problems, but we're not ready. Yesterday, I was saying that the largest spending we have done so far in terms of housing has been the time of the Shagari administration, where we created over 30,000 homes, built over 30,000 homes. Since then, whatever we've done is a far cry. But what's the problem with housing? Largely, it's a problem of ecosystem. What's in the ecosystem? Regulation. That's why we have a lot of building collapse. What's also in the ecosystem? Research. Have we ever thought, must it only be cement we should use for building? Are there no other cheaper material alternatives that we can use to have public mass housing at an accelerated rate? Part of the ecosystem is also enabling environment, like Dr. Abati talked about. Access to mortgage. What's the role of the federal mortgage finance banks? What's the role of interest rates? What's the role of the economic outlook? What's the role of skill and competency training? Today we talk about building homes, but we even forget that we have a big problem with masonry. To get very good Nigerian tilers is a problem. People over the border from Togo and the like still come to do most of the tiling job because we've not been able to pass on skills. So it is a problem of the ecosystem in general. And when we start to change the ecosystem, the regulatory framework, the research, the economic situation and all of that, then this can start to fall in place. And who says it must always be cement? There are other materials that can be used to build that can do a veritable job as regards the system. So, yes, 748 homes, the administration will celebrate it, but I'll also say it's a far cry to where we are going. And home building and sustainability of the housing sector is also directly proportional and related to the state of Nigerian economy. Let's think. There's a new administration coming. There's a lot that can be achieved. It's another blank slate for us. But will Nigeria take the chance?
Well, let's also, by way of a caveat, that the beneficiaries of those homes being given out are not only APC members.
Yes, sir.
And that there must be very, full transparency.
Yes.
In terms of who the beneficiaries are.
Yeah.
Those homes under the Federal Housing Authority, the beneficiaries should be Nigerians, not APC members. Mm-hmm. And I hope Minister Fashola will just do the needful and say, look, these are the beneficiaries, and that the Federal Housing Authority and the ministry have both been fair in their allocations.
I mean, that has to be said. Hope at last for hundreds of Nigerians fleeing the war in Sudan. The Nigerian embassy in Egypt has successfully moved evacuees from Sudanese side to the Egyptian side across the border. 449 students are now being prepared for their departure to Abuja through the Aswan airport, with the arrival of the Air Peace and the NAF plane, and the O1 journey home begins after necessary documentation. On Monday, Egypt agreed to open its borders to Nigerians with stringent conditions and demanding visas to allow transit through the country. And meanwhile, the House of Representatives has resolved to invite the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jeffrey Oyema, over the planned evacuation of stranded Nigerians in Sudan. The lawmakers are also inviting top officials of Nigerians in Diaspora Commission and the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA. Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila expressed concern over the interagency disagreement arising from overlapping mandates and the absence of established operational guidelines for such circumstances.
I have requested the chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs to invite the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and officials from the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission and the National Emergency Management Agency to appear before the leadership of the House to give an account of the status of evacuation efforts. Whilst our priority is to ensure the welfare and well-being of our fellow citizens caught in this war, we must further revisit the statutory and other frameworks that have left us seemingly unprepared to respond promptly and effectively.
Okay. A lot to talk about, Harry.
Well, yes, finally, I must say, our people are coming home. Our students, diplomatic corps members are coming home to Nigeria today. You know, but unfortunately, what I would say is that despite the fact that we've been given this assurance, we are hopeful that they will come today until we see the arrival, which which we've been assured by the Foreign Ministry that things have been sorted in terms of the many issues that have plagued the evacuation of Nigerians from the crisis laid in Sudan back home to Nigeria. We've talked about the issues a number of times. I wouldn't belabor that. However, I think very important is this development with regards to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, who has now said he's going to summon the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The Foreign Affairs Ministry is going to summon NITCOM, going to summon NEMA, so that they can look into what's happened with regards to Nigerians prevented from passaging through Egypt during the evacuation, and also, of course, the response and how the response was handled. The truth is that many times we are often responsive as a nation as opposed to proactive. In terms of our foreign ministry and our foreign response to crisis situation, it should be a document that we already have. There should be an MO by the Nigerian government as to what happens should a situation like this happen. We shouldn't wait. And that's perhaps why other countries were able to respond a lot faster than Nigerians were able to. And not to forget that beyond we responding really slowly to evacuating our people from Sudan, we then met with a multitude of issues along the way to even make the process even slower and more horrendous for those, for our citizens involved and their family members back home waiting to receive their loved ones. A number of questions need to be asked. A number of processes need to be reviewed. This can only be followed after a due interrogation and investigation into what happened. We can't continue to report news like this. It's not just going to be Sudan. There'll be other emergency responses that we would need to, as a nation, respond to. Check out other nations, their foreign policy. At the drop of a hat, you can understand what should happen. And members of the foreign mission should know what the procedure should be like in terms of our relationship with countries outside of Nigeria. It is important because there are many lessons to be learned. What we're hopeful is that beyond this chat, this investigation, this interview, this interrogation would not just be a tick box, would not just be to make headlines so that to demonstrate that the House is working or Nigeria is working. We would actually see action plans come out of these meetings. We would actually see documents and policies come out of these meetings to mitigate this embarrassing situation happening again in Nigeria. Again, looking forward to receiving our Nigerians back home. Again, kudos to Air Peace, the Nigerian Air Force, who are going to be airlifting the students. We hear that one Sudanese carrier is also going to be involved, and it's just the first batch. It's going to be in 3 phases, one from Aswan Airport, the other, and 2 others still to come, following in terms of it's not going to be all our Nigerian evacuees coming in at once, but we want to see every single one of them arrive safely in Nigeria.
It's 3 weeks since the war in Sudan. Effectively, there is a war situation in Sudan began. 12 other countries have managed to evacuate their citizens out of that war zone, including Somalia. Where Somalia, which has very serious problems of its own, succeeded, Nigeria has not been able to do so 3 weeks after. So, well, at one level, it may be heartening to hear that Nigeria now has been able to move 40 buses in the direction of the Aswan airport in Egypt and Port Sudan, and that the Nigerian government, 3 weeks after the war started, is now going to make efforts. So if we succeed in evacuating our people will probably be the 13th, 14th, or the 15th country that suddenly woke up to evacuate its people from the war zone. So this is the scenario. But here we have the House of Representatives intervening, which is the main story we're now looking at. Yes, the House of Representatives represents the Nigerian people. And it is in order perfectly that the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, would tell us that the House is now summoning the various stakeholders involved to ask a number of questions. First, about overlapping mandates that would seem to have led to confusion. Second, about the absence of operational guidelines. These are issues that the various agencies, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Nigerian Diaspora Commission, and NEMA, the Nigerian Emergency Management Agency, will respond to. But a bigger question raised by the House of Representatives is a request that the Nigerian government needs to take a look at the role of Egypt in the evacuation process with regard to Nigeria. I've said ad nauseum on this program that it is very disappointing that when there is crisis in Africa, African countries fail to come together. African countries fail to help their own. African countries give stringent conditions to their own. And our North African countries are particularly notorious in this regard. Egypt is a member of the African Union. But despite that, while the same Egypt will provide safe passage for other countries, when it comes to Nigeria, Egypt will start raising questions. We'll start talking about stringent conditions. I do not want to go into the details. So the House of Reps, speaking through Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, is absolutely right to say, look, we have to probe our relationship with Egypt. So I'm surprised that the ambassador of Egypt to Nigeria has not even been summoned to come and offer certain clarifications. We've been told, oh, okay, the president of Nigeria spoke to the president of Egypt, and on account of that, now the evacuation will begin. That evacuation has not started in 24 hours. So what is the reason for that delay? I've seen a video where the director of flight operations of Air Peace, was shown saying that, look, Air Peace was already on the ground since 12 midnight Nigerian time yesterday. But the Nigerians had not yet arrived at the Aswan airport from which they were supposed to be airlifted. And the director of flight operations was saying, well, we have a 777 aircraft here that can take 274 persons, food provided for over 300 persons, but the Nigerians have not yet arrived. But we are ready as an airline, supporting the Nigerian government, supporting the Nigerian people. So it's important that the various stakeholders tell us what is happening, what is delaying that movement towards the airport of Nigerians that are to be evacuated. Did another tire catch fire? Did the drivers begin another protest? So there are so many dimensions to this story that we find confusing, befuddling, overwhelming. And the only way all of this can be resolved is when we begin to see the arrival of our compatriots who are in Sudan, who have been kept there for logistics reasons, they tell us, for diplomatic reasons, they tell us, for complete 3 weeks. Many of them stranded at the Aswan border for more than 5 days now, as it were. We will be relieved when we see them begin to arrive. Whether they are taxonomized according to states, according to whatever, but we just need them to be out of danger zone, because there is danger in Sudan, and we need our people back home. The families back home are traumatized. They want their people back home. In the age of globalization, nobody should come with the unintelligent explanation that, okay, what are they even looking for in Sudan? these people, they go everywhere. No, we live in the age of globalism. Nigerians have the right of freedom of movement across the world, but they must be safe. The country of their own has a responsibility to protect them. We wait, we watch. When they arrive, we will demand more explanations. But first, the Nigerian government must play its part.
All right, Dr. Abati, piggyback, using your words, when they arrive, and we pray again this morning they arrive, we'll demand more explanations as regards the taxonomy of incompetence we see in Nigeria today. Because yes, if we're to qualify the level of incompetence we perpetually see, even Carl Linnaeus, the biologist that talked and dealt greatly with taxonomy, his books will be filled if we are to qualify the various nature and taxonomy of incompetence we see. What Honorable Gbajabiamila just did was to ask one question I asked yesterday. How can you have an evacuation without an evacuation guideline? And just to even extend the interministry relationship, you cannot do an evacuation in a war zone without having somebody from the intelligence department. So I would like to even add the intelligence, add the police, add the military, add the Air Force. Because before the decision was reached to take them to Egypt, who cleared the border in advance before they were coming? So if you needed a high-stake conversation by President Muhammadu Buhari, why didn't you allow President Muhammadu Buhari call first the Egyptians and have a high-stake conversation clearing the way before you go to the border? These are the things you only learn when you have planning and you have a proper interministerial conversation. We compare ourselves with the UK, but this was the same thing in the UK. What I'm saying is what the UK did when they set up Cobra. Cobra had to meet before they started the evacuation. Everybody must be involved. Because if everybody was involved, you will not have this overlapping of interministerial play. The ambassador on ground in Sudan was saying, it's not me, oh. They didn't even give us money. Oh. It's NEMA that was trying to pay the drivers. But we have an ambassador on ground, an embassy on ground, and they could not liaise. I hope this is a seminal moment, because it's not that we're bereft of ideas. We know what to do, but we don't just do it well, because you see, personal interest overcomes national interest. And that's what leads to this grand taxonomy of incompetence we keep talking about every time. Who is even issuing out statements? Because in all of this, we've seen a lot of overlapping of statements. NIDCOM will issue one, Ministry of Foreign Affairs will issue another one. My goodness me. In times like this, there should be a cohesive force. We should have one body that issues statements. Because this fight for what I call Karimism, see me, let them see me, I'm the one walking, will take us nowhere. So everybody is doing, see me, carry me, Karimism. Sure, finance will issue one, NIDCOM will issue one. Let's have a combined effort to be able to ensure that we bring these people back. And speaking of the Ministry of Finance, they issued out a statement yesterday because there was a story making the rounds that some Igbos were not evacuated from Sudan. They said that video was not true, and they had investigated, there was nothing of such, that everybody was carried along because there was a video about discriminating Igbos in the evacuation of Sudan. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has kicked against it. I said that's not true. They issued a statement as regards that. But I just hope we learn, and I just hope by the end of today, at least we should have some people back home. And I just hope that we are already talking to the families of these Nigerian students, because the trauma they are going through and having to learn and get information on national TV about their loved ones in a war situation is really abominable. It's really sad for them. You know, I'm sure that there's a war going on in their minds as regards that. We pray for the best of Nigeria. God bless Nigeria. We can't wait to have them back home soon. But we need to deal with our inefficiencies.